When most people talk about WooCommerce performance, they mean speed, load time, core web vitals, time to first byte. And I'll be the last to say all of that doesn't matter. A slow store loses people before they even get a chance to buy. But speed is not the whole system. A WooCommerce store can load quickly and still perform very badly. It can pass every single speed test you throw at it, and it can still confuse customers. It can have great core vitals and still make your checkout feel really clunky and risky. It can be technically fast and still fail to bring people back after the purchase. So in this video, I want to show you 7 ways to improve WooCommerce performance that goes beyond chasing speed scores. Because real WooCommerce performance is not just how quickly the page loads. It is how well the store helps a customer complete the job, the purchase, and how cleanly the business can support that journey behind the scenes. So let's start with the obvious one, the first one. Your store needs to run efficiently, and that means good hosting, smart caching, and a database that is not fighting the business model. And fewer unnecessary things happening on every request is what you want. And with WooCommerce, one setting you should definitely check and change is high performance order storage setting. HPOS changes how WooCommerce stores orders. So instead of treating orders like normal WordPress count, like a custom post type, WooCommerce with HPOS uses dedicated order tables. And that matters because the orders are not blog posts, they are business records, and they get searched, updated, filtered, synced, reported on, exported, and connected to all other types of systems. So it makes sense to store them in a structure designed for orders. And that's exactly what HPOS does. For new WooCommerce stores, HPOS is already turned on by default. But I would still check it. There's more settings than just the one turn it on. So go to your WooCommerce, go into settings, find advanced, and then features. Look for high performance order storage and check whether it is enabled. And check the related compatibility settings. So if WooCommerce says a plugin, for instance, is blocking HPOS, do not just shrug and move on. That is WooCommerce telling you one of your plugins still expects order data to work the old way. So now you have a useful question. Is that plugin actually critical? Has the plugin developer added HPOS support? Is there an update available somewhere else? Or are you carrying old technical debt because nobody has questioned that plugin in years? So this is the first performance lesson. Sometimes performance is not about adding another optimization plugin. Sometimes it is about removing old assumptions from this system and then cleaning it up. Now, let's look at the second improvement, object caching. WooCommerce asks, no matter if you have HPOS activated, but WooCommerce asks a lot from the database. Product, variations, stock, cart, sessions, order, customer coupons, options, and transients, and all of that adds up. If your store has meaningful traffic and you are not using proper object caching, then WordPress keeps repeating work it should not need to repeat. And this is where Redis or Memcached can help. My favorite is Redis, but depending on what your host support, it might mean you are limited to Memcached. Real server object level object caching is what I'm referring to. So not a random plugin with a checkbox that promises to make everything faster. That's not what object caching is. Object caching helps reduce repeated database queries. And that makes the store much more stable under pressure. And that's an important distinction. The goal is not to make one test page load fast when nobody's using the site. The goal is to keep the store responsive while real customers are browsing, adding products to cart, applying coupons, and checking out. When you look into object caching, also look at Object Cache Pro. I'll link it in the description below, but it's a plugin you need alongside object caching on the server. Now, let's look at the third improvement. The third improvement is also a version of caching, but it's edge caching. This is where a proper CDN can help. And edge caching essentially means caching that lives in front of your site, not in your site. There's an important thing here, though. With WooCommerce, you have to be careful with introducing edge caching. You cannot just turn on full page caching and then have that sync to the edge everywhere and hope nothing breaks. That's not how this works. That is how you create weird cart behavior, checkout issues, and account page problems. When personalized content starts showing up where it should not, you have a problem. So the goal is intelligent caching. Static assets should be coming from the edge. That's a no-brainer. Pages that can be safely cached should also should be cached at the edge. So your cart, your checkout, and your account pages should be excluded. Customer-specific behavior should stay dynamic. Cloudflare can help with this when you get the APO service inside of the caching solution inside of Cloudflare. APO helps with this when the rules are set up properly, and out of the box, APO does exactly that. A good WordPress focused host can also help. So for instance, Servbolt, Kinsta, WP Engine, they all give you a much better foundation than just cheap shared hosting with, 3 plugins stacked on top. It's the foundation that matters. So the faster the infrastructure can respond, and if it's at the cache, it will respond faster than the server, so it actually doesn't touch the server, it doesn't touch WordPress, the less pressure you put on everything else. If you want to go a little deeper and into the technical and foundational understanding of the WordPress performance side of things, I have a link in the description to my Make WordPress Fast course. Do check it out. But for this video, I want to stay zoomed out because the technical speed is only one layer of WooCommerce performance, and this is where many stores get the diagnosis wrong, right? So let's now move beyond the technical speed once you have checked out what edge caching versions you can implement. Again, I highly recommend you look at APO from Cloudflare. It's also linked below. Now, the fourth improvement is product page clarity. A lot of WooCommerce stores lose money on pages that are technically fine. They load quickly, they look designed, they have sections, badges, icons, reviews. There's upsells, there's trust blocks, there's payment logos, and maybe a pop-up here and there. Sure. But when you look at the page as a customer, the decision is not actually made easier for you. It's actually heavier. You have to process all of this stuff. So open up one of your product pages and ask yourself a very simple question. Can I understand what this product is, why it matters, and what I should do next within a few seconds? Meaning, is there a good call to action? Because if not, the page has a performance problem, a conversion problem. Maybe the headline is too vague. Maybe the product image does not show the thing clearly enough. Maybe the variation options, maybe they create fiction. It's very possible, for instance, that the add to cart button also gets buried under too much surrounding noise. Maybe the page simply tries to say everything at once, and it shouldn't. A good product page should reduce hesitation. The customer understands the offer, and the primary action should be obvious. And then from that, trust appears before the commitment, so, people will actually click. It shouldn't start to appear after 5 scrolls on that page. That product page helps the customer decide instead of making them work harder. That is performance too, because a page that loads in 1 second but takes 30 seconds to understand is still not performing well. All right, so let's look at those product pages and let's figure out how to optimize them better for conversion. The fifth improvement is checkout clarity. Checkout is where the performance becomes painfully practical. At that point, people are no longer casually browsing, right? They have decided they want to buy something. They are trying to pay you. So every unnecessary field, every unclear message, every surprise fee or confusing ship option, And, any other distraction matters here the most. And this is where WooCommerce stores often become very fragile. So you add a field editor here, shipping rules there, payment messaging from another tool, and an upsell plugin on top of that. That's not the stuff we want on our checkout pages. Each piece, each thing that is on that page might solve a real problem, but together they can turn the most important page in the store into a chain of hidden dependencies. And hidden dependencies are dangerous. They not only make it harder to check out the test, it also makes people want to leave the checkout page. But because you have all these dependencies, all these things interjecting into your checkout page, it becomes harder to debug. It becomes harder to improve, and it becomes much easier to break. So audit your checkout with that in mind. Do you really need every single field on that page that you ask for? And are shipping costs really super clear before the final step of hitting purchase? Are the payment options, are they super obvious? And do the error messages that, if you're not processing the checkout page correctly, do they actually help humans? Does the page feel trustworthy when someone is about to enter payment details? And lastly, can you explain in plain language which plugins affect checkout and why? Because checkout should be boring, predictable, clear, super stable. The customer should not notice your architecture. They should just be able to complete the purchase, right? So check out those checkout pages and fix what needs fixing. Now, the sixth improvement is revenue performance. This is where WooCommerce builders often think way too narrowly. They focus on the store visit, the product page, the cart, the checkout, but revenue does not only happen while someone is actively on the website. Revenue also happens through lifecycle communication. Let's look at the ways. Someone abandons a cart. Someone views a product but does not add it. Someone buys but needs reassurance. Someone should receive product education after purchase. Someone should be asked for a review at the right moment. And someone should see a relevant cross-sell. And, if someone has not bought in 60 days, they may need a reason to return. And all of that sort of messaging is part of store performance. Because if your store only makes money when someone happens to visit, you don't really have a revenue system. You have a storefront. And this is where a tool like Omnisend becomes very, very useful. Not just as email marketing in the shallow newsletter sense, but as a lifecycle infrastructure. Take abandoned cart recovery. That logic does not need to live entirely inside of WordPress. In fact, I highly recommend you do not have that inside of WordPress. I highly recommend you use a service that is hyper optimized for this. So the customer then leaves the cart behind, Omnisend picks up the behavior, and the follow-up can happen outside of the store itself. Maybe the first email that it sends is a simple reminder, maybe the second adds social proof, and maybe the third includes an incentive if your margins allow it. That is not just sending email, that is revenue recovery. Browse abandonment works earlier in the journey. That's another thing we can focus on. Someone looks at the product, shows interest, but is not added to cart. So that tells you something. So instead of waiting and hoping they come back, you can follow up with education, reassurance, or maybe a reminder of why that product matters. Then post-purchase flows, they help you after the sale. The customer buys, and that should not be the end of the system, right? That should not be the end of your communication. That should trigger reassurance, usage guidance, review timing, relevant cross-sells, and eventually reactivation if they go quiet and haven't purchased in a couple of months. This is how revenue performance compounds. You're not just starting from zero every single time. You're building a system that keeps helping customers move forward. And the architectural point is important. Not all of this business logic belongs inside WordPress. WooCommerce should run the store, yes. WordPress should manage the content and commerce experience, yes, but lifecycle messaging, segmentation, automation, and retention logic, that belongs in a dedicated system. This keeps WordPress lean and mean, much more performant, but it also gives the business better reporting. And it reduces the temptation, when you think this way, it reduces the temptation to install 4 or 5 more plugins just to solve problems email automation is better suited to handle. Now, let's look at the 7th improvement, and that is operational performance. This is the one people ignore until the store becomes painful to work on. Operational performance is how maintainable the store is, how predictable changes are, how quickly can you improve one part of the system without breaking another part. And the simplest audit for that is this. Look at every plugin and ask what responsibility it owns. And this is super important. And there's a bunch of options we have here. You need to check if it is infrastructure. Is it the e-commerce self? Is it the checkout? Is it the design? Maybe analytics, maybe email, automation, reporting, or was it installed 2 years ago to solve one small problem nobody remembers anymore? Every plugin adds surface area. That doesn't mean every plugin is bad, but it adds some version of load, some version of performance. It is required to load that plugin. So WooCommerce stores, they need plugins, but every single plugin that is needed for WooCommerce should have a very, very clear job. And the problem starts when these responsibilities overlap in the plugins. So when checkout depends on too many small tools to optimize the checkout, you have a problem. When optimization happens in the host or the CDN, the theme, and the plugin that you installed extra all at the same time, that's adding complexity that's going to mess up the performance of your site. Let's look at what happens when you also start using page builders that add on extra packs or plugins or add-ons or whatever you call them that exist for one particular widget. It's a lot of stuff extra load that needs to be loaded extra. And you need to wonder if that is really desired, if it's needed, if it's adding, if it's making the site actually better. Again, the same thing happens when email logic or cart recovery, coupons, pop-ups, and all these analytics scripts, customer segmentation, you name it. If all of that sits inside WordPress as a separate plugin, that's a decision you need to really reconsider. Because at that point, you're making the store not just slower, you're making it harder to reason about. It becomes a system that is just too much. It's too much that is interacting with each other, and thus it makes it super hard to debug and properly make it fast. Because when a system is just hard to reason about, people actually stop improving it carefully. They start guessing. The stack becomes a combination of workarounds. Some will start avoiding updating plugins because, when I update that plugin, that's going to cause a problem. And they delay changes and all that sort of stuff that eventually turns operational debt into actual performance debt. Slow to load, slow to change, very hard to diagnose, and almost impossible to grow. So the better question is not, how do I make WooCommerce faster to solve any performance problems you have identified? The better question is, which layer should own this responsibility? Technical performance belongs to hosting, caching, database structure, and delivery. But experience performance belongs to the product pages, the checkout clarity, the trust that it exudes, and the decision that flows from it. Revenue performance belongs to lifecycle communication, segmentation, and retention, all that sort of stuff as previously covered. Operational performance, that belongs to the architecture, what does my actual build look like, your plugin discipline, and the clear ownership of plugins inside your WordPress/WooCommerce sites. And when all of those layers are aligned, WooCommerce just becomes easily scalable. It's just, It's a logical compounding of business decisions combined with technical decisions. And it doesn't become easier to scale just on a technical level, but commercially and operationally as well. When those layers get mixed together, the store just becomes messy. And messy systems, they will become slow systems. So if you want a better performance model for WooCommerce, do not stop at speed course. Check HPOS and the related WooCommerce settings. Use real object caching. Use edge caching intelligently. Make product pages clearer. Make checkout simpler. And move lifecycle revenue logic into a proper system like Omnisend. And reduce operational surface area by making every single plugin, literally every single plugin, justify its place. That is a much better than staring at a lighthouse score and pretending it tells you the whole story. It doesn't. WooCommerce performance is not just about page speed. It is about the full customer and business experience.